Hello, thank you for joining us for today's Ask the Pet Food Pro. I'm Debbie Phillips Donaldson, Editor-in-Chief of Pet Food Industry, and I'll be your moderator today. Ask the Pet Food Pro is a series of expert chats brought to you by Pet Food Forum and the editors of Pet Food Industry. You can find our content at petfoodindustry.com. Today's chat delves into a topic that's very important to the pet food market's continued growth: developing premium pet foods. It is sponsored by Extra Tech. Thanks very much to them for their support. Our expert today is Will Henry, who's the Process Group Director for Extra Tech. Welcome, Will, and thank you for joining us today.
You bet, Debbie. Thank you for having us.
Before we start the discussion, I have a few announcements. First, you've all been muted to ensure everyone can hear and focus on the discussion, so please submit your questions or comments in the chat box. Some of you submitted questions beforehand. We got a lot of great questions, so we will try to get to as many of those as we can, along with the ones you post today. Finally, this chat is being recorded. You can access recordings starting in about a week at petfoodforumevents.com. Click on the About tab at the top of the page, then select Ask the Pet Food Pro from the drop-down menu. So with all that out of the way, we can dive into the topic. So Will, say a company is looking to develop a premium pet food product or treat. Where's the best place to start?
I guess from what angle you're talking about in terms of, do you start with an equipment manufacturer? Do you start with a consultant? Or are you more interested in the process that we go through as we help a client develop? And we can talk about both ways if both of them apply, you think?
I think we should talk about like the product itself. So before people know whether to go find a consultant, all the things you just mentioned, do they start with a position statement? Do they start with here's our concept of there's a niche in the market that we could fill with X?
Yeah, so from that standpoint, I start with two main focus points. Number one, what's the vision for your product? It's kind of like a product charter, okay? What's going to be a differentiator, for one thing? What's going to stand you out from the rest of the industry, if that is part of your goal? What do you want your product to say in the marketplace? How are you going to market it? Is there a place in the market for it? And then what's the overall plan? Are you targeting low carb, grain-free, high meat, dare I say premium or super premium? Is it going to be functional? And then how does it relate in terms of sustainability as well? It's kind of like an interrogation with our clients. Let's figure out exactly what you want. Because sometimes they come to us and they say, and I'd say half the time it's more of, here's the ingredient deck I want, make me a product. Or here's a product I want, but I don't know what goes into it. Or here's what I want, and I need these two ingredients on the top three spots on the ingredient deck. It's usually a decent mix of those three criteria that we start with. So very ambiguous, not highly visible at that point. So it could take quite a while to get to that point. Okay. And that's the second thing I try to do always, is to set expectations, both in terms of the expected life cycle of this journey, but also in terms of ingredient costs and logistics. Because those are things that most groups, especially startups, they don't understand, that you can't just make the product in a week and then have it on the shelf the next week. There's too many juggling balls in the air to get it done in that short of time. So that's where I always start with those two things: is what's our charter, and then let's set some expectations.
And in terms of helping them figure out what exactly they want, if we can, maybe we'll dive a little bit more into some of these elements, especially ingredients, because that seems to always be an important feature and question. But for example, product design or format, is that something you do? I guess it depends on the product that they have in mind, but I'm assuming some clients would come to you and say, we want to enter the freeze-dried space, just throwing something out there. So do you start with that, or do you start with, I guess it depends on what they bring you first? Is that how it goes?
It does. They have to have some idea of what they want. And most of them do. We rarely, if ever, has a client come and say, we need a new product. That doesn't help us at all. Usually they've got something in mind. They want to enter into kibble or freeze-dried or fresh or minimally processed treats, semi-moist, soft moist. They've got an idea where they want to go. And that's where we start. And we also try to, in terms of the set expectations, we also keep that in mind early on, because we have to know from the beginning, can we take this to an actual production plant? First of all, if they've got their own equipment, is it going to fit their current structures and concepts? Or we've got to design it so it fits into a co-manufacturer's current architecture. So those are good to know early on, so you start building those relationships, which we already have those, but the client needs to build that relationship.
What does that look like? One of the questions that we actually get fairly common, very often at at pet food industry is, I'm entering this space. Can you recommend a co-manufacturer for X? We don't recommend any because that's not our place. We have a list that we can direct people to, but I'm assuming that can even be a little bit fraught for people to wade through. Like, how do you know which of these companies to call first, for example? Can you talk a little bit more about that co-manufacturing relationship and helping people find the right company?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We look at it from many aspects, not just in terms of the architecture, but also the personality and culture of our client and understanding where they best fit in. We look at it from aspects of ingredient availability, their performance, but also their quality structure. Are you BRC? Are you SQF? And how that fits into the vision of the end product. That plays more into whether or not they're going to export out of the US.
Right.
And then I also have to target those co-mans that fit that mold. And what we always start out with, again, with the expectations, the more complex your product, the narrower the pool you get to choose from for co-manufacturing. But
Sure.
also, typically, the higher your cost of production will be as well. Because you've got let's say, a highly functional treat facility that's got, for example, a pair of twins. They can do coax, they can do single, simple extrusion, and they've got all the required short-term cooling and drying, but also long-time curing available, which is a rarity within the industry. They can pretty much set their own price because they don't want to be cavalier and say, where else can you go? But they do bring a lot of value to the market, having all those capabilities in one facility. So they've earned the right to charge a premium cost of production.
Right. So
So
as
all those go into consideration: culture, personality, complexity, and cost, and setting those, again, expectations early on. And that's something we'll do even before we do our first test run, is we'll run through this economic feasibility trial where we add up all the costs. We figure out this is where we're gonna have to go to that for co-manufacturing. From history, here's what their costs of production are. Here's what you're looking at for total cost of goods sold. And then you add on distributor markup and retail markup, and then your profits. Here's going to be your sell price to the consumer. Does this still fit in your marketing?
Well,
We
it's a
do
very
that usually within the first month of a new product development. Before we even mixed ingredients and made a test batch, we'll go through that phase first.
Sure, because it's very complex. And to your point, if companies go in, and I'm sure this happens, companies go in without a good idea of that true upfront, the true of total costs and the timeline, they could be sorely disappointed at the least, and at the worst, waste a lot of money and time.
Oh, yeah,
Right?
it's no different, Debbie, than laying out a project for a new facility or planning an
Sure.
upgrade. You get all your costs up front first to get approval. Here's going to be my total output. Does it still make capital sense to do this project? And we'll do that feasibility usually depending upon how complex it is. That cost can be anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000. But it's all soft service and it's all time spent developing their product on paper and getting those costs lined up. But when you compare that to total cost of ownership on developing a new product, when you're looking at maybe multiple tabletop test runs, because if we get something that's really off the wall and we don't want to invest all that raw material cost on a test lab test run, we've also got a tabletop we have access to. It's 1.25 inch bore. You buy a couple 100 pounds of raw materials, you mix up 30 or 40 test batches. And if we can get a heartbeat out of that small machine, you're not going to make a perfect product, but if we can get a heartbeat out of it, then we know we can move on to our larger test machine to do a full scale trial at a much lower cost. So we may end up doing 3 or 4 days of tabletop runs, and those are at a lower cost. Those are $1,500 a day plus raw materials. But then when you go to the full scale pilot plant, you're looking at least $15,000 total just for 1 day of testing. So
Wow.
huge jump in investment. So let's spend a little time again, just like the economic feasibility. Let's spend a little bit to determine how far we can go. If we pass that hurdle, then let's do another one. If we can even make the products, if we get a heartbeat there, and then go to the next step. So
Right.
total life cycle, you're still looking at potentially $250,000 to develop a single new product.
Wow, I don't know if you can see the chat box, but we actually had a question come in a few minutes ago. What's the typical ballpark dollar to start a company in the space in the US? That's not starting a company, that's just launching a product.
Oh, yeah, that's a general number. Of course, the more complex, it could go a little higher. If we hit it on the first mark, it could be a little lower. Where it gets more expensive is the implant verification trial, where you go to your co-manufacturer or you go to your own facility and you do a test run there and send out for feeding trials, digestibilities, palatability, and those things. That's when the costs really start adding up. Because typically you're going to rent a production plant for about $1,000 an hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then raw materials on top of that, you're not running at 800 pounds an hour at my facility, our facility. You're running at production rates. If your treats, you could be as high as 3,000 to 5,000 pounds per hour. On kibble, you're going to be up around, you want to be up around 8 or 9 tons to make it a functional test. So that's a lot of raw materials cost.
Yes. So speaking about raw materials, you mentioned ingredients several times, the ingredient deck. Let's talk a little bit about that. So do you recommend that it sounds like people will come in with okay, we know we want this type of product with these kinds of ingredients. Often people know they want a certain label. They want a lot of times, right? They want a certain ingredient deck on the label, pet food label. So how much time and effort does it go into working through that? If you want this to be the first ingredient listed on the label, which means it has to be the highest weight by weight, here's everything else that's going to have to go into the product. And so you have to have all these other things to make it a complete and balanced product if it's a food. So can you talk a little bit about working through all of that to help people understand the full cost that they might be facing?
Sure. And I want to start this by saying I'm not a nutritionist by any means.
Sure.
I'm an engineer by education. We don't have any nutritionists on staff within our process team or 1SG, but we have partnered with some very good nutritionists in the market, people that I've known for more than 25 years in the industry. I think that's also key, is finding a good nutritionist group that you trust, that you know how to work with, and they can respond to a somewhat dynamic situation. Because half the time when we approach these subjects, number one, they don't know, right? Number two, a simple request would be, we want this ingredient first on the deck. That's easy, okay? Usually. It's when they start blending different criteria. Like, we want XYZ first on the label, but this also needs to be at all breeds, all life stages. Well, that's when you start having some issues dealing with, I think, like your calcium to phosphorus ratio on your large breeds. You got to balance that for that type of product. So it could be a quick process, especially for a treat where you're really held to lower nutritional guidelines. But it's when you get into those complete diets, maintenance diets, functional diets, that we start to have that back and forth. Usually, even on the most complex ones, we can get through that usually within 2 weeks, depending upon my availability and that of the nutritionists. It also depends on what that specific ingredient is. Is it commonplace? Is it already loaded up in their Concept 5 software? They already have a profile for it, so they can do that energy balance and the caloric density on those diets as well. So there's a lot of things that go into answering that. Like I said, it could be very quick, but we've seen it go on for 3 or 4 weeks as well, both because of the complexity of the diet, but also in dealing with the client as well, not understanding how the process works and what they're actually asking for us to do.
And also then you have to factor in, if an ingredient deck is settled on, how are you going to source those ingredients? We all know the supply chain is very volatile right now with tariffs and it's always got a certain level of volatility anyway, just because of the global marketplace. But yeah, so that's a big issue right now. People have to know, I think, that okay, if you reach a product that you want to take to the market, to be able to actually produce it at scale, you have to ensure that all the ingredients that go into that are available.
That is part of these set
basis.
expectations. We always come back to that. Once we have that ingredient deck, we double check that feasibility as well. And again, that's got to be paired not just with, can we source it, or the logistics, but how about the co-manufacturer? Does he have any rules against using that product, regardless of where it's from?
Okay.
So it all keeps circling back to the same setup. Is once you get an answer on step 18, you still go back and double check it with your expectations and feasibility on every single change along the way. And that's probably one of what slows us down the most. I wouldn't call it a pitfall, is that anytime we get requested to make changes, we've got to go back and double check all the previous steps that one change is going to affect, which again adds time to the overall timeline. I just say it happens a lot, but it does happen. So
sure, especially as you find out all this information during the development process.
Yeah. And there are times also that we're having to investigate new ingredients, but lucky for us, we've got great relationships with the ingredient companies in the States. So I've got contacts at all the major players. If I'm looking for something or need something, it's usually just 3 or 4 phone calls away.
That's good. That's good. And you mentioned multiple times that the timeline and expectations. I think it's worth maybe discussing that a little bit more in terms of how important it is to stick to a timeline, not trying to rush any part of the process because it could come to bite you in the end.
Oh, yes, that's very true. Stick to the timeline, stick to the steps. The biggest pitfall or mistake that we see there that's made by our clients is let's design the bag first, or let's design the bag too early in the process before we've got something that we can put in the bag. The biggest challenge there on, especially on kibble, is bag fill, headspace, making sure understanding the role that density plays in texture, cook, and palatability. And every unique matrix out there has a specific density that it wants to run at, both in terms of quality aspects, palatability, but also process efficiencies. So we have to consider all that, and that's got to be figured out before you design that bag. And that's the biggest thing we see is, oh, we've already got the bag designed. That's when I say, time out, guys. We don't even know if it's
Yeah.
going to fit in the bag. I've already bought 25,000 of them, so you've got to make it fit.
Or they have the bag already done and you find out an ingredient isn't available, or something happens when you're in the trials where, okay, we just cannot produce this product in the way you want it with this mix of ingredients.
And that's actually an easy one to fix. You can let's pay extra to put a sticker on the label to cover up
That's true.
the printed ingredient deck. So that's an easy one. We don't mind that one too much. It's when they change, like I said, density for one thing, size and shape will affect it, durability on the product. The bag's not designed to maintain durability and integrity of the product. Those are the key ones that really will force them to go back and waste money, or force us to make changes to the product that doesn't fit in the original product charter that we developed.
And somewhere along in all that, there's marketing chomping at the bit to get their specific message.
I gotta be careful. My marketing director's on the call here, so I don't want to say anything too disparaging.
Yeah, and believe me, I am not knocking marketing people at all, because that's what helps run the industry, right? To appeal to consumers.
That is correct. But you're right. If they jump the gun and they start showing preliminary samples to potential buyers, and then they're pushing from their end to hit a deadline, then what do? Do we cut corners to hit that timeline? Personally, we will not do that. We just say, here's what we agreed to. Here's the timeline as it sits. I'm sorry, but we wanted you not to go make that step ahead of time. We do try to be political about it, of course, but it is what it is. So whether it's marketing or it's a sales guy for the company that takes these products out and starts selling it before it's ready to go.
Sure.
That's usually not a detriment to the product development. It really just increases some angst in the process a little bit, but we work through it and get them a good product in the end. Yeah. Good question, though.
A question came in. You were talking a little bit earlier about extrusion obviously is your specialty, so you've talked about that. Also, so like some curing and things. A question came in: is it more expensive to get a wet pet food up and running versus dry kibble? Are you aware of that? Or maybe is freeze dried more expensive, for example, to start than dry? Or if you have any knowledge of that?
Oh yeah, and that's actually a common misconception. We're not just focused within the process group and 1SG. We're not just focused on kibble and pet food. We work in numerous areas. Not too long ago, I was out working on a Pop-Tart line for human food, doing some project layout and design. So just a culmination of a career that branched out into those industries during my automation days and controls. So we're not just focused there. We can help in every aspect of the space that we're talking about. In terms of costs, yeah, I would say a kibble plant's probably if we're looking at just dollars to get it started up. Is that kind of the question?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I would say a kibble production plant is going to be, by scale, your most cost effective in terms of how easy it is to do. You throw in an extruder, you got a weighing system, order your pre-blends from a mill provider, and then all you got to do is extrude it, dry it, coat it, package it, clean it, or cool it. That's going to be some of the easiest ones.
That's probably the easiest type of co-manufacturer to find too.
Yes, it is. Yeah, very easiest to find. Yeah, maybe not these days because of the market and the demand, but yeah, there's more of them out there. You start talking about wet foods, they're a bit more complex, especially depending upon the type of wet food you're looking at. In that process, you're joining usually a meat product and then a gravy. So you have to have two separate processes that feed one, and then package it and then retort it. Retort machines are not cheap. They're higher in maintenance costs, higher in CapEx. And same thing on the co-man side. Per pound, you're going to pay a little bit more because it's seen as a more premium diet. So there is that. It's still, I'm not sure you can call like a canned retort product minimally processed because you're hitting higher temperatures, pressures, longer periods of times in the retorts. So I'm not sure that fits in that minimally processed discussion point. And minimal process is going to be in there between your kibble, and your freeze dried in terms of cost, whether it's cost of production or capex to get into it. And that can actually start out with any number of types of equipment, whether it's a steam tunnel, something to form the product. You can even use a typical extruder, modified a little bit to be a cold forming machine, just to form a shape, or to heat it a little bit to give it a little bit of cook, and then send it through a steam tunnel. So there's numerous architectures you need to look at, and that really needs to be defined by, again, what's your product charter going to be, and let that define the process.
You meant, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. So I'd say freeze dried is probably at the top in terms of cost, but
Okay,
also because of the size of the market available. You got to
Sure.
consider that as well. I'm not saying it's minute and insignificant, because there's a lot of freeze dryers out there, companies that do that. So it is significant, but when you compare it to the volume of kibble that's made, it's very small in comparison.
Gotcha. So you mentioned minimally processed, and that seems to be, you hear more and more, it shows up in consumer surveys. That's what consumers are looking for or think they're looking for. But do you have, I'm not sure anyone knows what that truly means. It probably is the mind of the beholder. Do you have a definition that you follow for that, or one you've seen that you think makes the most sense?
When I'm asked, I guess, I'm not sure if even our process group has a set definition we all run on, and maybe we do, but when I look at it, it's always measured against the bar of cooking extrusion.
Okay,
We're targeting a high level of gelatinization of the starches. We're looking at above 95% cook on the starches. We're looking at a high denaturing of all the proteins when we're looking at the meats. So it needs to be a shelf stable product. So it has to be fully cooked and dried back down. That's the top of the bar when we look at processing. Okay. Now,
Gotcha.
there are some lower levels of extrusion that are still dry expanded that doesn't hit that high mark. Because you look at some facilities, some processes, they're running die temperatures at 270 Fahrenheit. They're running preconditioner temps a little above 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're getting high cook. But then you look at some of these LID products, you can't run those that way. So limited ingredient diets, or especially your grain-free limited ingredient diets, grain-free camp diets. We like to run that preconditioner, assuming your food safety system supports it. We like to run that preconditioner sometimes as low as 145 Fahrenheit. So compared to 200 down to 145, that's not fully processed. That's not high cook. Is it minimally processed? How does that fit in your scale? It is less processed than fully cooked. And then on die temperatures, as far as my team, we target about 215 degrees off the die, because we know in our food safety systems, in a general term, we hit full thermal cook at 187 Fahrenheit. That's our food safety critical control point. All right. So
Right.
anything above that is over and above. We don't need it. So if we can acquire product definition at 210 or 215, we'll hold it right there. So again,
Gotcha.
215 compared to 270, that's a big jump. Is it
Sure.
minimally processed? We're not sure. It'll, again, let your project charter define where you need to be in that processing zone. But the other end of that scale, again, with either an extruder or with a PDU or a former, we've got processes where you throw in frozen meats that's been slightly ground, mixed with some dries, and we form it into a shape. And the die never exceeds 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So it comes off that line, mechanically conveyed, lightly toasted, air dried, whatever you want to put after that. I would list that I would say if your temperatures are below like a typical kill step, and you're using time instead of high temperatures, like in your toaster or your air dried oven, you still got to apply some heat to make
Right.
it shelf stable, get that moisture down. But you can achieve that. It's an inverse relationship in terms of
Sure.
time and temperature. You can drink your temperatures, but you're going to extend your times.
Gotcha.
And sometimes that gets away from our standard equipment offering, because nobody wants to buy a dryer from us that has 3 hours of retention. They're going to go with a
Right.
spiral air dryer. So you've got minimal real estate, but maximum drying time.
And then, of course, then you get into the whole element of, when you say it's shelf stable, but is it also like completely safe? Like, has a kill step been applied? Which, of course, is a trade-off between fully processed and minimally processed, and where in there do you make sure it's still safe and shelf stable?
And you don't have to have that kill step if you design your product as safe in, safe out. Take, for example, your supplement soft chews. Those cannot be processed at high temperatures, because you'll start destroying the functional components that you want to have active for the animals. So you build your ingredient deck around a safe in, safe out, so you don't require that kill step. Keep your moistures low, keep your ingredients safe, and then you're just pressing and forming it into a shape. So there's ways, I'm not going to say around that, but there's product definitions that take you out of that realm of requiring a kill step. So in the first process example I gave you, where we're forming cold meat, almost frozen meat, and we're using a kill step on the backside, but it's still minimally processed, you can flip that as well. If you start out with a gentle cook in the extruder or a rotator or some other type of equipment like a steam tunnel, gently process it there over a longer period of time, and that's your kill step. Again, it's time over temperature, and then further process it gently to get your moistures down, or maybe even not if you plan on having it refrigerated. So that also takes the kill step requirement out of the equation, is that if it's going to be listed as fresh, ready to eat, that's a different set of criteria.
Sure.
So again, I'm not sure if that gave you a good definition, but I understand minimally processed, you're going to apply some heat somewhere in the process, and it's going to be lower than what you typically see for cooking extrusion. And I believe that gradient depends upon who you're talking to.
And I think the idea, I don't know if this would translate to consumers, but I think the idea of looking at processing, the level of processing based on the amount of heat applied makes a lot of sense. Now, again, whether a company and a brand can take that and convey it to consumers, that's where the brilliance of marketing comes in. So
exactly. Also, let's add one more thing there, not just temperature, but also pressure. Because now you also got that high pressure processing. I'm not sure I would call that minimally processed, because it's cooking under a very strenuous environment. So to me, I don't know if I'd call that minimal processed.
Okay, that's a good point, because the raw pet food segment, a lot of those companies do rely on high pressure processing to make sure that the products are safe. So
oh yeah. And I don't want to come across as promoting one or the other.
No, I get it.
By any means, every one of those examples that we've talked about, whether it's cooking extrusion or forming, they all have benefits to the animal. They all have benefits to the ingredient deck and the space we're talking about. So we're not a proponent of any one in particular. We simply try to react sometimes, but also be proactive in providing solutions that our clients need.
Right. Yeah. And again, it goes down to what the clients want.
Exactly.
What part of the markets are trying to reach. So minimally processed obviously doesn't have a real clear definition, let alone a regulatory component. We had a question come in through registration about what premium means, whether there's a regulatory definition, no, or quality control. I mean, in my mind, premiumization seems to be starting to be changing in the marketplace. If you look at what do you think in terms of what does premium mean these days?
Yeah. So if we go back a few decades, not to age myself in the industry, premium used to mean it was exclusionary diet for one thing, or it had some fresh meat in it. Any kind of level of fresh meat, that was a premium diet. To your point, the definition of premiumization has changed drastically, because now fresh meat in the product doesn't always, in the mind of the industry, mean it's premium. Because you add fresh meat to, and I hope I don't upset people here, but a corn-based diet, because corn has a stigma. Nobody wants corn and soy these days, which is fine. So I should say not everyone, but there's groups that I think in the sense of the market takes it out of the premium area. So just having fresh meat doesn't make it premium. What I see today in terms of what defines premium is obviously the quality of your ingredient deck. Okay. Nice, wholesome ingredients with less than 5 syllables always appears better on the label. If the consumer can pronounce it and they understand what it is, to them, I think they see that this is a premium diet. This is a good diet. If it has fresh vegetables and fruits in there, that's always a bonus. I also believe premium is in relation to functional diets.
Okay.
Like a weight loss diet, a good ingredient deck, not filled with fillers, just to act like it's saving some fat gain, but actual good ingredients that kickstart the metabolism. That is a digestive caloric deficit. It's burning more energy to eat it than what it's going to bring back to the body. So that's in my mind. Now, I think you can also add to that, I think the industry standard from what we see in terms of our R&D, about a 30% inclusion level of fresh meat is nominal these days. That's almost standard. You start talking about inclusion rates above 50%, 70%, to where you're getting at least close to that 50-50 range of fresh meat and others. Those are going to be considered premium diets because they're a more complex diet. There's a lot more in the eyes of the consumer. That's a more wholesome, natural protein that my animal historically is used to consuming. So that definitely plays a role. I think sustainability also comes into it in some form, whether it's in your packaging, whether it's in your ingredient deck, in all avenues, how the food is processed in a more sustainable manner. That adds to the premiumization of that product, especially if it's marketed correctly and marketed to that tone, if that makes sense. If you're doing it, but not showcasing it, you're not explaining how why you're premium.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes. And I know that if like market research firms used to say, we consider it a premium, we're tracking these as premium products because they cost X more than the average value product. Same with super premium. Someone just asked about super premium and we had a question come in about that. So I think it used to be that it was a cost. So premium is this much above a value diet, super premium is this. How do you define super premium versus premium, or do you even get into that distinction in your
That
mind?
changes so much from product to product that we deal with. Because again, for our earlier conversation, there's so many balls in the air that will affect that COGS, your cost of goods sold. It's hard to nail it down when you're comparing between standard and super premium and what's affecting that cost.
Sure,
I think in a general, because once you get into super premium, however you want to define that, the most impact on that, especially when you're considering fresh meat, is going to be raw materials.
sure,
Because now you've got a diet out there. You got a 10-pound bag that's half fresh meat, half dries that you put into a kibble. So 5 pounds of that is your fresh meat. You would have had to have bought 15 pounds of raw meat to use in the process
sure,
because fresh meat's 30% or 30% moisture, which you're drying back out. So your effective raw material cost, if you're buying that for $1 a pound fresh, your effective raw material cost is $3 a pound. So now you've got 15 pounds of, or $15 worth of food in that diet, adjusted with your dries that you don't have to mark up and sell. So in terms of fresh meat, in my mind, that's going to be your largest contributor to that jump in premiumization price. Yeah. Now there are some other ones in there. You look at some of your specialty binders, they could cost much, much higher per pound, upwards of $8 to even $15 a pound. But you're usually at a lower inclusion rate on most of those binders. You're down around 3%, 2.5% on those. So the cost impact is not as high.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. So I think when it comes to defining premium versus premium, the cost definitely is a factor, but it's not the only factor because it's a cost in terms of the type of ingredients, the type of product it is. And that's really, I think that's really hard to pare down for consumers. I think what we're seeing, and I wondered if you agree that there's been a lot of pressure on consumers in the last several years, first starting with the pandemic, and now you have inflation and tariffs and the whole thing. There's more and more consumers, I think pet owners included, who are being a little more careful about what they spend. They're still buying good quality food because these are their family members. But do you think that's changing the kind of product that people consider premium? You can find some quote unquote store brand foods that are definitely probably just as premium as a name brand anymore.
Oh, definitely. Yes. Again, it all comes down to consumer perspective. We all make our own decisions. What's important to me and what I feed my pets, what I consider premium, super premium, may not fit in with my neighbor down the road.
Sure.
So it really is a personal experience. It's a personal decision of what we're looking for. And that's why you see so many options out there in terms of how we produce and make a super premium diet. Is it the high meat? Is it ancient grains? That's one I think that's grown. We've had, I think, 3 or 4 projects recently where we're swapping out standard grains with ancient grains because it makes it more premium. It sounds better.
Sure.
It looks better to see quinoa and millet on the diet instead of wheat, for
Right.
example. And of course, that's also focused on another set target in the marketplace.
Exactly. Exactly.
The
What
people that
about
eat those ingredients will say, "Hey, I had that for breakfast with my yogurt. My dogs are going to love that too," just like you said earlier.
you mentioned wet fresh meat a lot. What other kind of trends in terms of proteins and premium foods are you seeing? We know that there's all the more exotic meats that have been around for 10 years ago. There's the cultured products now,
Yep.
insects, of course, I know you've done some work with insects. Do you see any of those sticking? Any of those alternative proteins sticking in the marketplace?
I do when I see them marketed correctly, which I think is
Okay,
being done. Once you get past the general consumer consensus of what that means, and then also
right,
once you see your dog go out there, and my dog loves to chase down locusts and eat locusts.
sure,
My cats do the same thing, and crickets and all that. So it's not alien for them to consume those types of proteins. From a sustainability standpoint, if you've ever seen that process where they're creating that protein meal or a liquid, it's a very sustainable process. So it should fit very well into that marketplace in terms of a premium type product where it's extremely sustainable. You compare the carbon footprint of that type of process to almost any other type of process by comparison, and it's lower. Now, again, I'm not saying the other ones are bad. I grew up on a farm. My family still runs a cattle farm back home, so I'm not disparaging that one bit. but in the eye of how you're marketing it, positioning it, insects should be on the rise. I think they are. I think it will stick. So something else that we're seeing quite a bit as an increase, we've seen it for some time at a very small scale, but it's becoming much more prominent just in the last year and a half, 2 years, where our clients are wanting multiple fresh proteins in a diet. So we're not just doing 100% chicken.
Right.
We want a red meat diet. We want a blend of beef and bison and buffalo, or we want a blend of turkey and duck. We want to see whitefish and salmon in the blend. So that I see that segment also rising. I think that also lends towards a premiumization step as well. It's definitely going to definitely cost more when you have to blend those, which is acceptable. We understand that it's much easier to do a single protein and get that emulsified and out to a client, whereas instead of blending two different ones.
Okay. What about culture? Have you done any work with the whole cultured meat, or things like algae or anything for the non-animal side of the protein space?
Yes, we have, especially on the algae side, especially on the encapsulated and the microscopic algae. We see a growing segment there. We've actually just had meetings with some of the largest algal producers here in the US, looking to market that product specifically for pet food because of the benefits that it brings to the animal.
Interesting.
Yeah, we're very preliminary on some of the newer stuff, but the data looks interesting. Definitely the analytics support further investigation. So whether it'll grow or not, that's up to the industry, I guess.
Sure. Okay. We had a technical question come in related to premium pet food. What impact does a quality grind have on achieving premium pet food? I'm not sure how the person defining a quality grind, but maybe the better question is how much impact does the grind have, grind of the raw materials?
Yeah, grind has a huge impact on quality. I shouldn't use the term huge because Rachel's going to ding me on using that word later on because you can't really scale huge. It has a significant impact on the product qualities, whether we're talking about texture, cell structure, ability to cook it, also on the process efficiencies. Grind can have an adverse effect on that. So a starting point, and I wouldn't say there's a direct causality between a finer grind or better grind and super premium, because you look at, for example, I can't name any product names, but there are products on the market that they market the ability for you to hold up a one piece of the kibble and see the different components. That's part of their scheme. Is it is wholesome. We haven't ground it up and deteriorated all the components into a flour. Right. You can see all of it in the kibble. So the grind on that one is very coarse for a reason, but yet it's a premium product. So you've got those niche type examples that break the rule. Now, I guess to give you some benchmarks, as if it's a technical question, we not only consider the raw materials, we also consider the finished product spec, especially the size. So if we're dealing with for example, let's talk about kibble. We're talking about a large dog kibble, and the ingredients are not, let's take out, like, we're not using lupin holes, we're not using peas, because those ingredients require almost a double grind just to get them into the process, because they're very hard to begin with. So if we exclude some of those, we'll start with a 3.5 64 screen to do those general diets. Okay. One thing that causes us to make the grinds finer, dropping down to 2.5 or even to a 2, is if we're doing smaller products like cat diets or puppies, where you've got smaller kibbles, then you've got to get that product worked into. Sure. Also, if the ingredient components are harder to cook, and instead of taking more time to cook it, if we grind it a little finer, then we can cook it in the same amount of time. So that they'll ease the process and they'll get our capacity rates up, which is a good thing. Also, when we're talking about treats, because treats, the big difference between the food and the treats is you're feeding 1 to 2 cups of kibble or food to your dog or cat. So you're not looking and handling each individual piece. But when we talk about treats, I'm picking one treat out of the bag and I'm visually inspecting it every time. Maybe that's just me because I'm in the industry, but I do look it over every time. So I want the quality of that one piece that I'm holding to be, it's got to be consistent. It's got to be the same. So a finer grind is usually required on most of those treats as well. So I hope that answers the question he was asking.
I think that provides a lot of great information.
Yeah.
Getting back to the algae, someone asked, so the people that you're talking to in the algae industry, are they referring to choose as a protein source or as a superfood or other type of ingredient in pet food?
Yeah, yes to both. Yeah.
Okay.
It'll be a multifunctional component.
Okay. Okay. And then we've had a couple really good questions come in about temperature versus time. But before we get into those, I think we'll follow up on a few more ingredient ones. What would you say from all the people you work with, all the different clients you work with, what type of ingredients and functionality are product developers looking for these days? Which kind of speaks to what a consumer's looking for, right? They're probably
Yeah,
trying
for
to answer a
ingredients.
consumer, yeah,
Yeah, that changes again depending upon who we're working with and what they're looking for. We see a lot of search, we see a lot of development work for products that assist with texture on on the end product. Whether we're talking about elasticizers, whether we're talking about like gelatins for hardness and chewiness, gums for the same reason. So it depends. We also do a lot of testing with different binders, something that helps hold the product together because we're wanting to get away from, or we see a trend on the super premium of getting away from a lot of your cereal based starches and even some of your hard and true starches like tapioca. We're wanting to get away from some of those and finding something that's a bit more novel, something that labels better, that's more attractive on the label. Again, in the eye of the consumer, not myself, because I love
right.
using tapioca starch. I know how it's going to react. It's going to make a nice hard shell. It's going to hold together my fresh meats and my non-viable proteins. So we like to use tapioca. So there's a few avenues we look at when we're looking for those ingredients: sustainability, binding ability, texture support, and then also functionality. How is that
Okay.
going to benefit the animal? So I think those are your four common areas we look for, and that's why we maintain those relationships with those ingredient companies, is because we can have those answers to us readily available. And to that point, I would say within the last 3 to 5 years, our team averages about 80% of our projects are pet food related, and the 20% food, snacks, industrial, whatever. So 80% pet food. Of that 80%, 40% of those are directly with ingredient companies, helping them vet the efficacy of their ingredients in the animal or in the process. So I think being involved with those groups, it's a symbiotic relationship. So
Sure.
for one thing, it makes me look smart that I can learn from them and learn from the ingredient, then present on it. That keeps me in tone with the industry, maintains our integrity. Then that's also helping them to determine how we market that product to the industry.
Sure. Good point. Good point. Yeah, and we had a question come in about whether some of these ingredients, gelatin broths, or whether they add functionality. And it sounds like they can in some cases.
Oh, very much. Yes, very much. Yeah. And again, it depends on what it is, the value it brings. So, like
Sure.
you take your gelatin or your collagens, that's going to add a tremendous protein boost to the diet for one thing. But then also it adds that chewiness to it, or it changes that texture. So there's always going to be at least two benefits to a given ingredient. And I think that's also a key thing is if an ingredient can bring multiple assets to the party, that allows it to be positioned even better.
Because there's only so many ingredients you can incorporate even in a
Exactly. Yeah.
in complex formulation.
So if I can get one ingredient that boosts protein, that adds functionality to the animal, and then also it's easy to process, that's a winner in my book. And it brings
Right.
over at the end, it brings down my cost of goods sold, which usually our clients
Sure.
love to hear that. Hey, we've dropped the
Right.
price by 3 cents a pound on raw materials. They'll be like, fantastic.
Right. So I mentioned we had a couple of questions come in going back to the whole time versus temperature aspect of, especially in the one question is about extrusion. So you mentioned the kill step minimum and the difference between time and temperature, but what sort of temperatures are being used across the industry by different companies? Is there a general rule that if you're using higher temperatures, you can speed up your production rate, or does it just depend on the product?
It does depend on the product. It does depend on the equipment architecture. So and we can talk to this from our equipment standpoint because we have validated our equipment with live pathogenic cultures running a generic dog diet on a commercial sized equipment. So we have that scale. We know what our retention time is in the preconditioner and the barrel. We know how to affect it and change it. So we've got the threshold of at this time, here's our temperature. At this time, here's our temperature. Okay. With a given set of moistures. As you change the moisture scale, that also affects your time. So if you have not done those validation steps, then you are bound by prior art or what's publicly out there as industry safe. Okay. So let me say that first. And the easy way to look at that is you look at Dr. Fung's chart from years ago, but I think it was updated 2008, where it shows the death cycle of salmonella over temperature gradient. So yeah, as temperature increases, you can effectively make that kill step instantaneous down to 1 second retention time. Okay. We don't have a process that'll denature proteins in a second on the extrusion level. So we need that time. So when I say it's proportional, you got to have that scale for your equipment not for every product, but for every genre of product that you produce. So if you've got a low moisture, high shear range of products, you need to have that scale for that because you're going to run that differently than your soft moist kibble. That's totally different. Higher moistures, usually lower temperatures on that. You've got to have a set scale for those.
Right.
So I would say on a typical extrusion plant, you're going to have 3 different categories you want to validate in terms of food safety to ensure that you are truly providing a safe quality food for the animals. And just to give you an example, we've validated even kibble diets as low as 145 Fahrenheit.
Wow.
And we're still achieving a full kill. So now that was for a specific genre, operating the equipment in a specific way.
Okay.
And also what's a common misconception is the belief that super premium means it's harder to cook, harder to achieve that kill step. It's actually, in some areas of super premium, it's easier. You talk about high meat diets, your moistures in the barrel are going to be north of 40%. Moisture, water, is an excellent conductor of thermal energy. So the more moisture I have, the easier it is to kill it, to kill salmonella, for example. So as long as you've got the apparatus to put the thermal energy into the product, whether it be through steam injection at the preconditioner or heating up the heads at the barrel.
Okay. So the question is always, it depends.
I hate to always say that, but when you deal with,
But I mean, it really does. It really does.
Yeah, the pet food market probably has the most dynamic ingredient deck of all types of food industries out there. You try to compare a cereal box ingredient deck to that of a pet food these days. You're going to see 8 ingredients compared to sometimes as high as 50 or 60. So, right. Yeah, and that's going to vary across the entire board.
What about soft baked dog treats or biscuits? I mean, do you run into the same time versus temperature equations?
Very much, and actually the type of, again, the product characteristics. So if we're talking like a milk bone type product, not that I shouldn't have thrown out a name there, but a large baked biscuit bone, yeah, you can get a kill step on those, but those dryers, if you've seen those, are extremely long. You look at like Cheez-Its, those ovens are about 350 feet long at very high temperatures because you need that time for that moisture to penetrate that product. All right, same thing with an oyster cracker. Very high temperatures, long drying time. So yeah, that relationship still holds true. But again, you've got to have that validated because you want to make sure that temperature, that thermal activation gets to the very center of that bone. So if you're making a small oyster cracker type product, that's a very short time or distance to travel compared to a large, thick baked bone. That's going to take a lot longer time to get there.
Okay.
But yes, the same relationship still applies.
Okay. And then we had a question getting back to the gently cooked, which I think probably is somewhat synonymous with that whole minimally processed concept. So if someone's planning to develop a product like that and expand distribution to locations with different climate and altitude, from an economic standpoint, to ensure that remains stable, do you invest in different ingredients for that? Is it more a production thing? Does it involve packaging or the logistics as a plant and warehouses to maintain that temperature control, or all the above?
It is all the above. Again, it goes back to setting expectations. That's why we get in conversation of where this is going to be manufactured at, because that does play a huge role. So let me give you an example. This will tie into one of the questions on the chat list, is if we're making a soft, moist treat or a complete diet. If that's the product and it's being made, let's say up in Wisconsin, that's going to require almost you're allowed to use a different set of rules than if it's being made in Florida. Okay. Yes. I don't have to, because once it's in the bag, it's secured, right? Because on soft, moist, semi-moist, that's going to go usually in a poly-sealed bag. Okay. So once I've secured my water activity with the right levels of humectants, that's going to be a different load level than what I do in Florida. Because right there, while it's being processed and it's open air, it's actually going to be gaining moisture potentially that I have to then combat before I put it in the bag. Now, you can do that with ingredients like the humectants. Maybe you can do that with processing changes. Maybe the plant in Florida needs maybe a bigger cooler to help draw that moisture down to target than what I would need in a less moist environment. So it really becomes a pain when you start talking about production in Asia, where moistures are really high and it's for a longer period of time. You never have a dry period in Vietnam or Thailand. It's always hot and muggy.
Yeah.
And so that comes back to the question about what is the best packaging type for semi-moist and chewy dog treats to have an extended shelf life. I've always been a firm believer because you can spend lots of money on good bags, and that's fine. Sure. Our belief is let's secure a product. Let's make a good product, good humectants, that water activity. We like to target, if it's for an extended shelf life, I think the general rule is maybe south of 0.7. We like to target 0.6. as long as we're not having to take extreme measures to get there, like overloading it with, how do I word this? Because there are some really good humectants out there, and there are some humectants that are very functional as a humectant, but maybe it doesn't label as well in the eye of some of the consumers. So that's always the balance is let's get as good as we can with a good ingredient deck and then design the bag around what we can achieve with those product specs. Again, it goes back
Okay.
to the vision of the product. If we can achieve that and get a water activity of 0.6 with this nice ingredient deck, then we don't have to go wide on or expensive on a bag for extended shelf life. I've got soft shoes been on the shelf for 3 years, and I've got 80 bags, and I pull one open every now and again, and they're still fresh. And the bag it's a standard poly bag, stand up for some chewable pouch. So nothing fancy, but we developed a nice solid ingredient deck to get to that point. And I can still open bag now and squeeze that soft chew, and it still has the same water activity and moisture almost as day one.
And still palatable to the dog.
Exactly. My dog still eats it, but
Of
he's
course,
a
the
ranch
dog, yeah.
dog, so I'm not sure if there's anything he won't eat.
Okay, I think that's probably good places to stop. We're at the past the top of the hour. I know we did not get to everyone's questions. I apologize, but I think that Will and his team may be able to follow up on some of the specific questions. They will get a list of all the questions and can follow up on some specific things. I do have one more question for you, Will, and you probably can't answer it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's the new flavor of Pop-Tart that you're working on, or new type of Pop-Tart?
I can't talk about that.
Okay, I thought it
Yeah.
was worth a try, just to ask. Doesn't hurt to
Yep.
ask.
The last one that what I probably can talk about was it was a keto blueberry.
Hmm.
So a Pop-Tart made without carbs.
Interesting. I can see it's the whole point of having a Pop-Tart in my mind, but hey,
They
it's up
taste
for
pretty good. I
some.
like them. Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Okay, thanks very much, Will, for sharing all your insights and your expertise. Thanks again very much to Extra Tech for your support. Please watch for future Ask the Pet Food Pro discussions coming this year. I know we have at least 2 or 3 in October. We also have webinars coming up, at least a couple more before the end of the year. Also, please mark your calendar for Pet Food Forum 2026 taking place at the end of April in Kansas City. And finally, just a reminder that this is being recorded and it will be available in about a week at petfoodforumevents.com under the About tab. Thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. I will say, I do promise that if when we get down here, we get those questions out to us, we'll answer all those directly via email.
Okay, no, thanks very much, Will.
You bet. Thank you, Debbie.